Welcome into episode 271 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridgette Prue and Scott McLaughlin. Bridgette and Scott, it's the NHL vacation for the All-Star festivities, which I don't think take place until maybe Thursday through Saturday this weekend. And the Bruins are off until well into the first week of February. So we have a opportunity here for a mailbag episode, but how are you two doing? I don't know if we have an opening shift for this episode, but just how you guys doing in general?
I'm doing fine. No, it's going to be. I have a couple days off later this week, which is nice. Get that little mid-season break and then prepare for the stretch run. So, looking forward to it.
He's taking some maintenance time. Make sure he's right before the playoffs. Got to make sure he doesn't
making my quick little trip down to Turks and Caicos like the players. Just,
are you?
Nothing big.
Are you?
I wish.
Because I was gonna be pretty pissed, honestly. I'm doing good. I don't think we really have opening shifts besides just the fact that we've recently, since we recorded the last podcast, seen some dumb trade up ideas that we will get into, and that's not an opening shift. That is just like foreshadowing. We're gonna get to that.
Well, I have an opening shift for you. The last time we spoke, you kind of left us all on the edge of our seats. Like, were you gonna get a steak and cheese? Were you gonna do something? Like, what did you end up doing after last episode?
I got chicken wings.
Okay, what flavor?
I didn't get steak and cheese. I got chicken wings.
Well, that's a bit of a letdown.
I know. I'm sorry. I really had it. It was in my heart after what Scott said, but I didn't know where to get a good one. So.
All right. Yeah. I was hoping for something better than that, Bridgette.
I'm really sorry. I'm sorry.
It's what it is.
Down.
It is what it is.
We're recording at lunch. We're recording at lunchtime Tuesday, so this is a bad start, guys.
Now we're hungry again, huh?
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian.
The good news is we only have a whole episode to go here.
Yeah, we're only 2 minutes in.
All right. Well, then let's just jump.
Mailbag question. I'm just gonna be stuffing my face.
Yeah. I know, and I feel like going forward, a lot of the mailbags might be food related because they're kind of reading the tea leaves on what we like to talk about. But the first couple of questions we got, ironically, were from Brian and Scott, and
I told you guys to stop emailing us, okay?
We can't make this up. It's just every week there's, Scott and I just keep writing into the podcast, asking questions we're too afraid to ask when we
need a Bridgette to email it.
I know.
It's going to be another Bridgette listening.
Please don't see this as an opportunity to make a fake Twitter account that has my name. Please don't.
Well, now you just gave him the idea.
Don Sweeney's taking notes.
Yeah, he's like, I know the next burner.
All right. So this is a good mailbag because it's as we've talked about, it's just past the midway point of the season, NHL season, All-Star break. So a good chance for everybody to kind of take a step back and ask the questions that they're looking for. And the first couple have to do with some potential personnel decisions and moves the Bruins could potentially make at some point this year. So we'll start off hot with Brian. And obviously it's spelled Brian, which means you can trust them. Anybody who spells it with a Y, you cannot trust. So he says, you guys all seemed kind of stumped in the last mailbag when someone asked about how to replace Lucic's role in physicality. I get it. You're not allowed to say goon, but my buddy had an idea for someone who could fit the bill. Minnesota Wild man Pat Maroon. He has the 15 points that Brian suggested Lucic may have had he not, been suspended, or whatever, leave of absence. And Minnesota are barely in the wild card race, so he may be available. He goes on to say the Wild could be interested in a year and a half of Linus Ullmark. Their goaltending is atrocious this season. Would they want to trade Maroon, a first rounder, and one of their best prospects for Ullmark? Bridgette and Scott, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. This is sort of exactly the kind of player to target for cheap, physical, veteran presence on that fourth line. Obviously, Maroon has won 3 cups. Bruins fans know, unfortunately, he was on that St. Louis team in 2019 and then went to Tampa and won the next 2 after that. Brian, the emailer, Brian, mentioned what he's done this season. Like, he's still been a useful player. 16 points 16 now in 49 games. He's playing almost 13 minutes a game. He probably wouldn't play that much here, but he could easily be a fourth liner who gets 8, 9, 10 minutes. Can still chip in a little bit, and obviously still physical, can drop the gloves if needed. So I imagine he'd come pretty cheap. I think the Wild only gave up a 7th rounder to get him. He was one of the now that was in part because Tampa had cap issues and just couldn't keep him. But this is sort of I think the exact kind of player to target if you're looking to add that element to the fourth line.
Yeah, I mean, obviously targeting Maroon, he's proven to be the kind of guy you want on your team during a playoff run. He's had that success. He's a pest. He's tough. He can provide offense. My only issue is I think you could give up, like you said, less. I don't think this is like a trade that you would want to move one of your goalies for. To me, that doesn't make any sense at all. So if you can move like a later round draft pick, or if they want a prospect, like reasonably, not like a Lysell or Lori or anything like that, I think a deal could get made. And if you want to talk about where the Wild are in the standings, they are kind of far outside that wild card picture right now. Just because of how many teams are right in that cluster, it seems like it'll be hard to jump out for them and to steal one of those last wild card spots, because it's like 5 other teams ahead of them right now. I think it's more 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 teams ahead of them for a wild card spot.
5. It is 5, Bridgette.
It is 5.
Yeah.
Okay,
so they're only 7 points out, but yeah, they have to jump 5 other teams.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's like, okay, yeah, point wise they could probably do it, but that means that all the other teams have to lose too, and you're probably not going to see that happen. So yeah, they're probably sellers, which makes the Wild an interesting team to talk about, like the pieces that they might be willing to move.
Yeah, and Brian, the emailer Brian, also mentioned that the bonus in acquiring Patrick Maroon is that the Bruins could sell tickets to see Jack attempt to apologize to him because of the whole drama they had last year or the year before.
I was going to say he'd be like, Boston is on his no trade list because he doesn't want to come see Jack.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe they become like best friends, it's like when you
they go eat pizza together every Thursday. Oh
exactly.
God! If you guys don't know what we're talking about, look it up, but I'm sure you guys do.
Yeah. Well, there's it was a pretty big storyline. It was that I think we dedicated certainly half of the podcast episode to it.
Yeah, it was like reported in like USA Today, and it was like national news for that week.
Yeah.
And then again when he came back to town, it was a whole thing.
Yeah, because Jack did apologize to him, tried to like talk to him in the locker room. That conversation with people who were there lasted like 10 minutes, but it was basically like all Jack just trying to apologize, and then Maroon kind of went off on him. So yeah, that would be a fascinating bonus for sure.
From foes to friends, it's a tale as old as time.
Or you just hear Jack just rip them every game, just like finding, yeah. Could be fun. It could be fun either way.
Just to give my 2 cents, nothing different from what you guys said. I think, there's probably a lot of Bruins fans that would look at Pat Maroon and say, well, he's worthless, and he's slow and he sucks, and look at his analytics. I'm sure that those people are out there, and they're probably out there in spades, but there's definitely an element of physicality and durability, experience, toughness that is needed in the postseason. And if you disagree, then like Scott mentioned, go ask the 2019 Blues and the Tampa Bay Lightning the following couple of years, if they could have used that on their team, and they would say we absolutely could have, and we did, and that's why he was on there. And so, you can't really argue with success. You need a player like that, in my opinion, at some point. Even if he's not an everyday guy in the lineup, like, you have to be able to plug him in.
And I think people understand that in Boston because Sean Thorin, like when the Bruins went on their run, they had a guy that wasn't the most skilled guy. But Sean Thornton was still an important part of that lineup. I know he didn't play every single game in the playoffs, but people remember that team for having tough guys on it, not just Bergeron and, the skilled guys. So anyway, I think it's an understood concept in Boston for sure that even if you didn't like him when he played against you, you'd like him if he's on your team. I think Pat Maroon is one of those guys.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate, like, I'm good with it as long as he's cheap. I know Kevin Weeks mentioned him on ESPN. Like last week, they were doing kind of a trade rumors segment. And he said he doesn't think it would cost much more than the 7th that Minnesota gave up. That I'm fine with. If you get him for a 6th or 7th, good. If all of a sudden there's like a Pat Maroon bidding war and it's going to cost like a 4th round pick, I'm not doing that. Like, not going into the mid rounds or anything like that. Or it could be potentially part of a package, which I think ties into the question we can get to next from Scott the emailer.
All right. Well, yeah. Brian and Scott, which is huge Wild fans. The upcoming trade window. This is from Scott. Realistically, the Bees need a sturdy and gritty left shot D-man. Forward's lingering injury, Grzelcyk's injury history. I like Jacob Middleton, $2.45 million with 2 years left. What would it really take to make a deal to bring Middleton to Boston? I like the idea of the following pairings: McAvoy and Lindholm, Carlo and Middleton, Shattenkirk, Wotherspoon, Lohrei, 7th D. Carlo and Middleton could do damage against other teams' top lines, wear them down over 7 games. What do you guys think about this?
Another target I would like. I don't know if he's going to be available. Again, the Wild are not clear sellers yet, and Jake Middleton does have another year after this, so he's 28 years old, so he might be a player that is in their plans beyond this year. He's playing top 4 minutes for them, which honestly, I think he's kind of a fringe top 4 defenseman, but pairing him with someone in the Bruins top 4, I think, they can help elevate his game. He doesn't have to drive the pairing. Ideally, he'd be a third liner on like a true cup team, but he could play in the Bruins top 4, I think. But yeah, it's sort of a player who helps bring some of what they've missed on the blue line this year. He's physical. He's generally been a defense first guy, but he actually does have 18 points this season. So he has been chipping in offensively too. He can move the puck. He's not like the greatest skater in the world, but he does a little bit of everything. He kills penalties. So again, it would come down to the cost. If the Wild are expecting to be paid like he's a legit stud top 4 defenseman, I think that's probably going to get a little too expensive. But if it's something less than that, then it would make a lot of sense to me.
Well, it's an affordable contract. Like that 2.5 is more affordable than what they have now. So my question is, Grzelcyk like someone that you're trying to trade? Is that why Grzelcyk's out of these D pairs, or is it like assuming he's injured, or just assuming that he's not good enough to be in the top 7 guys on D in this situation? I guess that's a question for Scott, the email, or not necessarily. But Scott, you can answer if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily just list Grzelcyk as the 7th D there, and like maybe he's part of a third pairing rotation with Shattenkirk and Wotherspoon. Another part of this equation is like what's going to happen with Derek Forbort because if he goes on LTIR and like his season's over, that is $3 million more that the Bruins would have to work with. If that doesn't happen and his injury is short of term and they think he's going to be back, then you do have to free up money somewhere. And if you're trading for a defenseman, presumably you might be moving one out in another deal.
Yeah, I think Middleton is definitely a he's the kind of defenseman I think you'd like to add if you're in a Bruins position. I think he's definitely a fringe third D pair, second D pair defenseman. I think what makes him a top 4 guy is the incredible beer league mustache he has going, and I don't think you can teach that. You can either grow it or you can't.
And the teeth. I don't know if you've seen him smile, but he's missing at least one.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah. He looks like he just came off a 11 p.m. game in Hockey Town on a Tuesday night. So like that's the kind of guy I want in the playoffs. I don't know about anybody else. So I like Scott's suggestion and absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I just wonder, like, all right, so if we're talking about like a package deal, like if you want, say you want Maroon, like you want them both, what's the package then? Because that becomes not just like a 7th round draft pick. There's going to be more involved if you're trying to get two guys that can, be impact players for you in the playoffs. Obviously, we're still not looking at something huge, but would they want Grizzly back in return? Like, would they want, say if he's healthy, like, would that be something that'd be worth doing?
I don't think they'd want Grizzly or Forber because those are pending free agents, and that doesn't do anything for Minnesota. So
no, it doesn't. So
they gave up. So in order to get Middleton, they gave up Capo Kakinen and a 5th round pick, and Kakinen was sort of an established backup potential starter, but certainly not like a bona fide starting NHL goalie. So I don't know. You're talking about maybe a roster contributor and a mid-round pick. Like, does that get it done, or it all depends on what Minnesota's prioritizing, right? Because they don't seem like a team that's going into a full rebuild. So would they rather have a roster player or a prospect who's close to contributing than a high draft pick? Like that might be a better match for the Bruins, who obviously don't have many draft picks to work with in the first place.
I mean, the good news is if you're the Wild, or if you're the Bruins and Minnesota's not wanting to, Middleton and Maroon, if they part with them, that's not jeopardizing their long-term, plans as a franchise, right? So I think the question is, like, other contenders are going to probably want similar additions at the deadline, and what separates the Bruins from those other potential suitors. And like what I like about the idea of Middleton and Maroon in particular is because, like, we've talked about how the Bruins could use another top 6 forward in theory, and I still think that's like a really solid middle 6 contributor. I think is something the Bruins should still have in their mind, but they don't need this, and we'll get to it, but they don't need to throw away what they have right now with this team. And by bringing in Middleton and Maroon, you wouldn't be doing that. And Minnesota, like if you're the Bruins looking at a Florida Panthers potential matchup in the postseason, Maroon and Middleton are the exact type of players that you want on your team in a 7-game series against the Panthers, because they like to get involved in between the whistles. And whether the Bruins like it or not, whether the Bruins engage in that stuff or not, it's gonna happen, right? So who do you want to be taking those face washes, McAvoy or Middleton? Because I guess what Middleton will give him right back, and Maroon will too. And the Wild and the Panthers had a pretty spirited game down in Sunrise a few weeks back, and I just think that sometimes you do have to fight fire with fire. I think it's inevitable, especially when you're looking at who's in front of you in the, like, if it was a bunch of Toronto Maple Leafs in the Eastern Conference, that's one thing. But the Florida Panthers exist, and they have an identity, and you're going to have to go up against it at some point, I think, if you want to get to where you want to go to.
Yeah, I agree. Like, sometimes I think the physicality and that kind of stuff can get overrated, or guys who are willing to drop the gloves. Like, I don't think it's the most important thing in the world, but there's really no denying that, like, the teams that have won the cup have tended to have at least one or two of those guys. Maybe Vegas as an exception last year. Like, they weren't really dropping the gloves. They weren't overly physical, but they at least had guys who, were hard on forecheck or could stand up to hits. And that's the other part of this is like, we're not just talking about guys who fight. Like Middleton plays a physical game that stands up to forechecks. He's been pretty healthy. I think he's played every game this year, played 79 last year. And Maroon brings it on the forecheck. Again, sure, absolutely not the fastest skater, not the most fleet of foot, but he still gets in on the forecheck and can dish some hits out without just like chasing them and taking himself out of the play.
Did you want to push this a little further to the next two questions, which are actually, they're on the same lines. So, Brian, do you want to read it? I can read it. I have it up right now.
Yeah, go for it. Yep.
So this next one is from Joe. He says, huge Bees fan from Northeast Ohio. Never miss a podcast. Bees need a rugged D-man. Forbird is very injury prone and concerning, and they desperately need a fourth line center who can win faceoffs in the D zone, especially. He says he's concerned for what that means for the playoffs if they don't find that. And then the next question also is related to the center, and it's from RP. He says the Bruins fourth line needs grittiness as well as a center who can win faceoffs late in the game. What are the chances the Bees will send a lesser prospect or two to reacquire AJ Greer or Tomas Nosek before the trade deadline? So those are two names that obviously Bruins fans are familiar with because AJ Greer was put on waivers and then didn't clear waivers and ended up getting taken. So he's out in Seattle? Vancouver, Seattle?
Greer is in Calgary.
Oh, Calgary. And so
see him right after the break.
Yeah. And he was a great, grittiness, tough guy. He wasn't that big though. Like Maroon's bigger. Like Greer fit the role because he worked at that role, but I feel like Maroon is a bigger, grittier guy and also more apt to produce on the fourth line. But I guess the main question there is about centers, like a fourth line center. We talked about adding fourth line grittiness, but do they have an internal solution at center? Is there a lower in the lineup guy that's out there that is good at faceoffs? And I guess that's where the Nosek idea comes in because he was very steady at winning faceoffs and playing a good defensive game. But we talked about it when he was here that he just did not add offense at all.
Well, and Scott, I'm sure you have maybe a few more thoughts than me about personnel, but I mean, Johnny Beecher, he was doing well in the faceoffs. I don't think him going down to Providence was a lack of success in the circle. I mean, he's obviously an internal option that if he could get back to playing on his toes and being assertive offensively, that could be an internal option for the Bruins.
Yeah. First off, by the way, Joe being from Northeast Ohio immediately makes me think of the opening line of the Bruce Springsteen song Youngstown. So thank you for that. One of the greatest protest songs ever written. So on Nosek, it's worth noting here that he's been out since November. He originally had an upper body injury, then also suffered a foot injury and had to have foot surgery. He just started skating again, like within the last week. So before anyone thinks about trading for him, like he has to get back on the ice and show he's healthy. The foot injury that he can skate effectively, and it's not going to be a problem. And B, the upper body injury that he was battling, he wasn't taking faceoffs earlier in the season. So he's got to be 100% recovered from that and able to take faceoffs too. So I kind of think you have to put Nosek on the back burner right now because you just don't know if he's healthy, when he's going to be healthy, what he's going to look like. Greer, obviously, slightly separate topic since Greer's not a center, but an interesting name nonetheless. I mean, the reason the Bruins waived him in the first place was because what he brought was too similar to what Lucic brought, and they weren't really going to have that duplication. Well, obviously it didn't work out with Lucic and he's gone. So, are you, as we've talked about, like, are you looking for someone to fill that slot? And Greer in the regular season can do that. we saw even last season, like they didn't play him in the playoffs, and I'm not sure they would this year either. So you'd probably prefer someone more like Maroon in that role who has the playoff experience. I have some names for potential fourth line guys or other faceoff guys because, like Brian mentioned, you had a fourth line center who could win faceoffs in Beecher. The question is, do you think? Obviously, they sent him down because there are other things they want him to work on. Do you think he can work on those and get to the level you need him to be at before the end of the season? Basically, like, is Beecher still in the plans for this season? As, hey, he's going to go down for X amount of time, and I don't know, maybe in March or even in February, he comes back up, and we think he's going to be ready to contribute and potentially be a playoff player for us. That, like, we just don't know. We don't know exactly what they feel about Johnny Beecher as it relates to the rest of the season.
Wait, think about the people that have come up since Beecher has gone down. Like, do they really want Steen on the roster over Beecher? Do they really want Patrick Brown on the roster over Beecher in the playoffs? Like, I'm asking, like, that's something we're going to have to find out. Like, in my mind, it seems like the upside for Beecher is higher, but at the same time, like, maybe they think Patrick Brown is better defensively, and he's, Scott has defended him before. I think that he's not like a flashy fourth line guy. I don't know. I didn't have a huge issue with how Beecher was playing, and I think that the reason why he got sent down was because his contract allowed him to go down without getting waived, and that was part of it, because otherwise you'd have to waive someone like Lauko or Steen or whomever.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little more to it than that, though, because that when he was the fourth line center, that line wasn't scoring. Like, there was no offense there, and you can put that on the wings just as much as him. It's not all his fault, but I do think it's clear, like, they want to look at options that help them produce more offense. And I don't mean Patrick Brown, obviously, because, like, he doesn't. And my support of Patrick Brown is mostly tongue in cheek, just because I think he gets way more hate than he deserves. But like, obviously, I don't think he's really the answer.
I mean, Patrick Brown. I mean, you're not going to catch me, talking too much about him, but it is interesting the amount of hate he gets when he's only played like a couple handfuls of games. It's like how it's not like
it's the most disproportionate hate for a guy who has such a minimal role on this team.
Yeah. I mean, he's like barely ahead of Matty Falconer on the depth chart, the equipment manager. But one name, I think the biggest reason I think Johnny Beecher is maybe still in Providence or even went down. It's not because of Patrick Brown or Oscar Steen. It's because of Jesper Boquist. And I think the Bruins like what they've seen out of him. I think totally different player, but to Scott's point, the fourth line, when it was Lauko and Beecher and Steen, which is primarily what it's been since the departure of Lucic, or indefinite departure of Lucic, that line was offensively anemic. There was no offense. So, I mean, like, when the team is healthy, you're looking at a fourth line potentially of Danton Heinen, who has like almost 20 points in the year, Jesper Boquist, who is showing the skill set that made him an NHL player in the past with New Jersey, and an offensive contributor with them at times. And then Matt Poitras. And Poitras obviously is, where he fits best, we don't know. He's also dealing with his own injury issues. So I just think, like, yes, if Beecher works hard enough, I do think that there's a path for him back to the NHL roster for sure. But people aren't giving enough credit, I don't think, to Jesper Boquist and why he's kind of earned. He surpassed Beecher a little bit, at least in the eyes of the Bruins coaching staff and management, just for the time being. Because if it wasn't for Boquist, Beecher would be up here, I think, right now.
Yeah, that's true. I think Boquist did make that case for himself and play well enough to be on the roster. But if we're talking about specifically filling that role of a center that can win faceoffs and be good defensively, like, it doesn't solve that. And I wonder, like, Poitras, if he's the fourth line center during the playoffs, like, he isn't the best at faceoffs. Like, Beecher was better at faceoffs. he's gotten pushed around a little bit. Like the identity of that line definitely goes from being like a tougher line to like Poitras finesse. Like that, that's not in his game. I mean, can you imagine Maroon and Poitras next to each other? That's like, I feel like the two opposite types of players on the same line, and maybe it would work. I don't know. But it just feels like Poitras, the identity of the fourth line probably doesn't have Poitras on it. I know he's been playing on the fourth line a little bit, but if we're talking about a playoff team, like I don't really know how you mix all of those pieces together and have a successful fourth line.
Well, and that's where, maybe it's just a different kind of fourth line where it is more offensive, starts in the O zone, maybe has some speed, and more skill. And maybe your third line becomes more of an identity line based around Frederick and Geeky, and, whether it's a Lauko who's been there recently or maybe someone you acquire who fits in there. That's an option too. A couple of names though, if you're looking for veteran bottom six, specifically fourth line, probably helps on faceoffs. Nick Dowd in Washington is a veteran. He has another year after this at $1.3 million. He's got 13 points in 38 games. Has some playoff experience. Nico Sturm out in San Jose, won a cup with the Avs. Good on faceoffs. He only has 7 points in 30 games. My problem there is he's also signed through next season for $2 million, which I just think is an overpay for what he brings. So there'd probably have to be some salary retained. Then if you aim a little higher, a guy who used to be a fourth liner but has grown in Nashville's lineup since then, Colton Sissons is a player I really like. He's signed for 2 more years after this at 2.85, but good on playoffs, good on faceoffs, can play center or wing. He's physical, and then there's other centers or forwards who are good on faceoffs, but they project higher in the lineup and are going to cost more. Sean Monahan in Montreal, his name has been out there for a while. Adam Henrique out in Anaheim, veteran, plays center or wing, good on faceoffs. And Kevin Hayes, the Dorchester boy in St. Louis, could potentially be available. So there's my list of potential targets.
Yeah, like you said, the last few probably are higher in the lineup than a fourth line usually. So
I think the idea there would just be more, hey, if we just need another guy who's good on faceoffs in general, and we also think we need some middle six scoring help, like there's a couple guys who can do both.
Okay.
All right, moving on down, we have Duncan, who says that loves the show, wants to congratulate Bridgette on the Beanpot and PWHL opportunities, and that you did awesome, Bridgette.
Thank you.
Stick taps for you there. He says, I'm loving the offensive showing from the Bruins since Christmas, but I'm concerned they may be peaking too soon. Obviously love the peaks, but concerned that a valley could be on the way. Can the Bees avoid such a valley come playoff time? If not, is the roster structured well enough to handle that valley and turn it around come playoff time if it were to happen? We'll leave it there and then answer that first part.
Bridget,
you want to go first?
In terms of peaking at the right time, see, here's the thing with this is that I don't gamble. I don't, I'm not a psychic. I can't predict the future. Otherwise, I would be putting a lot more money on some of these games and I'm not someone who likes to try to predict the future too much. And in terms of peaking at the right time, I think that they probably will go through some more adversity here in this next month. We talked about it last episode. Like the schedule that's upcoming for them is not an easy February, and March they have to play Toronto twice, and they're playing Tampa. They're playing some of the tougher teams that have given them trouble. They're playing Vegas, right? coming up after the break. So they're playing good teams, and there's no way they're skating through that. I don't see them just like plowing through the schedule that they have in February. So yeah, they've had a good stretch here right before the break. I think it's good to give them confidence, and you want to see them use that confidence, but also I think there's going to be a few more learning moments before the playoffs. And to be peaking in January still gives you time to like have a few more struggles before, like, we're not really talking about trouble unless we're talking about like a big dip right around March and April. Like, those are the times where you don't want to be seeing that dip. But there's still time for some ups and downs in the season before we're hitting that kind of level of concern. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Yeah, they have 2 games against Edmonton late February, early March too, and the Oilers just simply don't lose anymore. So yeah, there's one more Western road trip in there. Yeah, there's going to be another valley dip, skid, whatever you want to call it. I don't think they're just going to plow through the final 2+ months of the regular season, and that's not a bad thing. Like, it's probably good for them to have at least another hiccup to have to grind through and overcome and pull themselves out of at some point. Like, those are good things to go through, as long as you do pull yourself out of it, right? If all of a sudden it lasts 2-3 weeks and you're 2-11 over your last 13, like, that's not good. That there's nothing good to be gained from that. But if you go 1-3, 1-4, and then turn it around, like, that's fine. And so yeah, I wouldn't worry about them peaking too early to get to the heart of the question. I generally don't really believe in that kind of stuff. Like, you just try to grow your game and get better throughout the season, period. And whatever peaks that leads to, like, you're not going to intentionally lose because, oh boy, we've been winning too much. Like, you just try to keep getting better.
Well, what about the second part? We're back to the President's Trophy curse being brought up. And because the Bruins are once again, they're tied for first in the entire league. And they're first in the conference. So we had this conversation last year, and I feel like I got in arguments with people in the office about like how stupid the curse was. And then of course, when they don't win this, they're like, oh, well, I told you this is a curse. Like, no, that's another thing. I'm not a psychic, and I don't believe in the curses either. I don't know.
I mean, I think, and real quick, just to touch on that first part, the year the Bruins won the Stanley Cup in 2011, they lost 10 of their last 18 games heading into the playoffs. So, like, it's possible. Like, also, like, some teams also stumble into the playoffs and then get hot in round 1 and never look back. So, it's more about just having the maturity to just, when the playoffs come around, you want your habits to be strong heading into the postseason, but ultimately, once that puck drops, you gotta enforce those habits all over again anyway. So, I think this team does have the mental maturity and mentality to implement that in the playoffs, if not for just learning from last year. Bridgette, as far as the President's Trophy curse, I think I'm with Scott. I don't believe in curses, but I do think that it's not even so much the fact that they finished first last year and broke all those records. It's that the media and everybody and their mother talks about, what if they choke? And I think it's more the outside noise that gets into the locker room than it is actually winning the league in the regular season. Obviously, that outside noise comes because you win the league. But like, I don't think it's because they were better than everybody in the regular season. I do think sometimes bad habits creep in. And I don't think the Bruins are playing desperate hockey like some other teams were, i.e. Florida, trying to make the playoffs last year. So it's a layered question. I don't think it's a black and white answer. I do think it's incumbent upon the Bruins, no matter where you finish, to play desperate.
Don't you think, because this is another thing that we've brought up in the past, like, when you have that embarrassing first round exit the year before, I feel like that usually is enough to kind of give you a little bit of a kick, like to play more desperately than last year, because you now have this bitter taste in your mouth of we're supposed to have this last dance with Bergeron and Krejci, and we failed them, and we don't want to have that taste again. Like, I've never been in a room full of grown men that were as like completely out of it and upset as dealing with the locker room after that game and on breakup day. And I don't think that any of them want to feel that again. So maybe that sting from last season helps them a little bit in terms of blocking out the noise, not just going in thinking we're the best team and we're going to, cruise through anything. I think that all plays into.
Yeah, and if they were to win the President's Trophy this season, I don't think it's not going to be as decisively as last year, unless they go on like an incredible 2-month heater here. But I think like if they win it by a point or two, there's just far less pressure and far less talk about it than running away like they did last year, which, I don't believe in curses, but I do think pressure can get to guys. And I think if you're going in feeling like, hey, like we better win it. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like, we better not screw this up. Some guys can use that the right way. Other guys, it eats at you the wrong way. And like, I think back to the Patriots in 2007 being 18-0 and losing in the Super Bowl. And you've heard from players on that team who have said things along the lines of like, might have been better if we had lost at some point before then and not had that extra pressure to complete, a perfect season. And the Bruins last year, like, that regular season was about as close to perfect as you can get in the NHL. And it's that similar kind of pressure of like, you look like an all-time team. You better not screw it up in the playoffs now. I do think like that can kind of get to some guys, and you're just not going to feel that this year. Like, they're not going to be that kind of team, even if they are the President's Trophy winners.
And last year, like, the NHL is such a difficult league to win the Stanley Cup in. It's the toughest trophy to win because of I believe, the demands of the sport and 4 7-game series potentially. Yes, everybody would have been disappointed had the Bruins not won the Stanley Cup last year, but what they couldn't do was lose in the first round. Like, you go to the conference finals, you lose to, whomever, Tampa, like, I don't know, name a team. Like, that's one thing. But or go to the finals and lose to Colorado. That's like, no, it is what it is. But to lost the way they did was unacceptable. And I think that was like, had the Bruins just held on to that lead in any of those closeout games and surpassed the first round, I think a huge weight would have been lifted off their shoulders, because I think they felt that same pressure. Like, I think they felt, get us to the first round and we'll be off and running. And they just couldn't. Going forward into this year, yeah.
Brian, you muted yourself.
Bad take. I do think if they go into the postseason as a top seed again, you're gonna hear the narrative out there of, are they gonna do it 2 years in a row? And they're gonna have to sit there and battle through that. And
I wonder who you'll hear that from. I wonder who is gonna be.
A lot of people, honestly. Obviously, I know you're referring to a couple of local radio hosts, but I think it's gonna be all the hockey talks in Canada, and any hockey market in the US will be talking about it. I think because a lot of people don't like Boston sports. Because of the success. It's fun to see some of these teams flounder and fail, and it is a storyline, right? Like, can they redeem themselves? They're gonna have to do that, I think. All right, Bridgette, do you have the next question in front of you?
I have it up. Yeah. Well, do we want to go to the next one? I can read it, but I feel like we kind of already got to it. This is from Chip, who is a Detroit Lions fan. So we're sorry.
Sorry, Chip.
So his Bruins question says, I'm very concerned with the faceoff.com playoffs, especially during shorthanded or power play situation. The eye test tells me they struggle with this. Scott Please stat me up if wrong. And these face-offs are often the difference between winning and losing a game in a series. Overtime games come to mind. And I feel this group will be in a few of overtime games in the playoffs. So I don't know, Scott, did you have the face-off stats, like where the Bruins stand in the league in terms of like win percentage?
Yeah, and I will say not as bad as you would think. On the power play, Bruins are 58.8%, which is 7th best in the NHL. And shorthanded, they're 45.6%, which is 11th best in the NHL. If you're wondering how 45.6 is 11th best, it's because pretty much every team loses more than they win shorthanded, because you just don't. Not only are you outmanned, 5-on-4 in general, but you're outmanned on faceoffs. The team on the power play can have an extra guy diving in to try to win it back, whereas the shorthanded team can't overcommit an extra body like that, because then if you lose, you immediately have a 2-on-1 somewhere, and that's not good. So they've actually been at least fine, better than fine in terms of special teams face-offs. I also looked up defensive zone face-offs, because that's obviously important late in games too. 51.7%, which is 10th best. So yeah, you're not as good in any of those areas as you were when you had Patrice Bergeron, who of course was the best face-off guy in the league. But they're keeping their head above water, and that's because a lot of those big draws are getting taken by Charlie Coyle or Pavel Zacha, and those guys are both over 50%. They're not among the best in the league, but they've been good on faceoffs for the most part.
So
right.
there's your stats, Chip.
But to Chip's point, like there's no doubt about it. There's definitely a direct correlation to having a high face-off percentage, and teams being successful. Yes, a lot of you can think of a lot of playoff overtime games where it's a marathon game, and it's a one face-off and a shot through traffic that just bounces in. I mean, the Sean Corrali goal against the Senators in Game 5 or Game 4 back in 2017, kind of plays like that. You win a face-off, you get it to the net, goes off a skate and in, and then obviously you win a face-off and you're controlling where the play goes, and it's very important. Okay, so Don Sweeney, this is an interesting one. I don't know. Well, we'll answer it. Over the last 15 years, 10 Cup winners have had a first overall pick. 4 have had a second overall pick. The only team to win a Cup without a first or second overall pick was St. Louis in 2019, with a 4th overall pick. Do the Bruins need more high picks to win a Cup, or is JVR their loophole? I'll add one more, and this is probably included in the 15-year sample size. Obviously, the Bruins had Tyler Seguin in 2011, second overall pick. Bridgette, Scott, do the Bruins need more high draft picks if they want to win a Cup, or is JVR the exception and the loophole?
Well, technically, he is a second overall pick, so he does count if towards your stat if the Bruins go on to win. But he's not your loophole, because he's well past the age where his prime. I'm sorry, but if you had him when he was 22, I would say yes. But at the same time, I really don't believe in this. You have to have a first or a second overall pick in order to win a Stanley Cup. I think what JVR brings that helps the team is his experience and his mentality. It doesn't really have much to do with him being able to overwhelm teams with a skill set that's like a Connor McDavid or Connor Bedard type of skill set. And also, if you recall, Tyler Seguin wasn't a huge contributor to that Bruins playoff win. Obviously, he was fresh to the team at that point, but still kind of in and out of the lineup. He wasn't in every game of that playoff run.
But one could say the Tampa series he shifted,
Yeah. You could definitely argue they don't win that series without him. I think By the way, at Duns, missed one on St. Louis, not a top 2 pick, but Pietrangelo was the 4th overall pick on that team. Jay Bouwmeester was the 3rd overall pick. So they also had him.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I don't particularly care about the numbers of like where guys were drafted, but I think what this does illustrate is that you tend to need superstars to win a Stanley Cup. Like St. Louis also might be the lone exception of like not having a true superstar on their roster, depending on what you think of Pietrangelo or Ryan O'Reilly. I think those are really good all-star caliber players, but not superstars. So the point of you tend to find superstars high in the draft is accurate. Like if you go through these rosters, Vegas trades for Jack Eichel, who's 2nd overall pick. The Avs roster, Nathan McKinnon 1st overall, Gabe Landeskog 2nd overall, Cale Makar 4th, even like Mikko Rantanen 10th overall. Lightning, Steven Stamkos 1st overall, Victor Hedman 2nd overall. Capitals, Alex Ovechkin 1st overall, Nicholas Backstrom 4th overall. The Penguins dynasty, Crosby 1st overall, Malkin 2nd overall, Marc-Andre Fleury was 1st overall. Blackhawks, Patrick Kane 1st overall, Jonathan Taves 2nd overall. Kings, Drew Doughty 2nd overall. Like even Anjay Kopitar 11th. So you need stars is the bigger takeaway here, and it's easiest to find stars at the very top of the draft. The Bruins have found them elsewhere.
Yeah.
To their credit. David Pastrnak was 25th overall. Charlie McAvoy, 14th overall. Brad Marchand was a 3rd-round pick. Like those are all stars. And so
Patrice Bergeron, not a first
round
pick.
I was sticking to this year's roster, but yes.
Well, I'm saying in we're talking about like when they won the cup, like and also just like who have their best players been over the past 10 years are guys that probably should have been 1st-round picks or should have been higher picks. Like David Pastrnak should have been a lot higher than that. So the Bruins really got lucky. If you look at it, you know, from now, like in hindsight, but yeah, they got their players further down, and it's because they didn't have a lot of high draft picks because they were, you know, for certain years they were too good to have a high round draft pick. We talked about how they really haven't been in a rebuild in a long time, and that's where you're seeing like Colorado ended up with all of those really high draft picks because they were bad.
All those teams
were really, really bad. So
yeah. Colorado had one of the worst seasons of all time. And you know, if look, in the Blackhawks, to you guys' point, like the same thing all these teams have in common is that they all bottomed out prior to getting these players. Like, you know, the Penguins.
The Blackhawks had home games getting blacked out on TV.
Yeah.
The Penguins almost moved out of Pittsburgh. Like
right. And
they were truly rock bottom.
And I'm sure you could find a few. If you ask Bruins fans, okay, like next year, would you mind coming in dead last if you know you're going to get the 1st overall pick the following year? Like, I'm sure many Bruins fans could be like, maybe. I'll think about it. Maybe, yeah. But if you were to tell them, you know, I want you guys to bottom up for the next 2 or 3, 4 years, to like, no fucking way. And that's what these teams had to do.
Also,
the Blackhawks, the Penguins, the Avalanche. So
and it's not a reverse order draft; it's a lottery.
Right.
It's
exactly.
not like you're getting Connor Bedard. Like Connor Bedard shouldn't have even gone to Chicago. Like if you look at the way that things bounced, like they were not the last place team. Wasn't it Anaheim? Or I mean, it wasn't Chicago. They were bad, but they weren't last. You know, so you're not guaranteeing.
I think they were 3rd. Anaheim and Columbus both had better odds.
But
exactly, you're not guaranteeing yourself Connor Bedard by tanking.
To Don's point, though, so I think the answer is kind of somewhere in the middle. Like, you don't need. Scott said it best. You don't need necessarily a 1st or 2nd overall pick. What you do need is a superstar, wherever that superstar comes from. David Pastrnak, we just mentioned, he is, you know, he and Leon Draisaitl are the class of that 2014 draft. And he's one of the best goal scorers, if not the best goal scorer in the world. You found him at the end of the 1st round. Nikita Kucherov is on another planet. neck and neck with Nathan McKinnon. One was first overall, one was like a second rounder. So now I know the Lightning do have Hedman and Stamkos, but it just so happens that most superstars are drafted high, but you just need a superstar wherever you can find them. And the Bruins have that player in David Pastrnak. I mean, you could tell me right now, David Pastrnak was the first overall pick in 2014. You can fool me. So it's about having at least a superstar. And I think for the Blues, Vladimir Tarasenko was close enough to that for that team at that time in the league. He was closer to a superstar back then. And Pietrangelo is he's a all-world defenseman. So need a superstar, not necessarily a first overall pick or a second overall pick. It just so happens the teams he rattled off in the last 15 years had them and they were drafted there because, obviously that's how it works. But just need a superstar, and the Bruins have one. All right. I don't have the next question up in front of me.
There are two more that I see here from YouTube. And so one is trade related and one is about what's going to happen with Matt Poitras. So I'll do the Poitras one first. Sharon said, what do you think the Bruins will do with Matt Poitras after the break? Curious because of the very diminished playing time and fourth line role and better play by Geekie and Boquist. Do you think they end up sending him back to Guelph? And then when their season ends, having him come back as a Black Ace?
Sorry, mine just froze, but I'm happy to answer that.
Okay, go ahead, Scott. Oh no, he froze again.
Hopefully everyone can hear me. Sharon is probably also a list. I see people laughing, so I'm assuming no one can hear me right
now. no, we can hear you. You're just frozen as a popsicle is all. But we can hear you if you want to give it another shot.
I think maybe one of us should answer first.
Okay. So I think Poitras. I think you got to keep him around. I think depth is very important. You're always an injury away of needing like what Matt Poitras does bring you that Johnny Beecher doesn't bring you, or somebody like that is. I do think Poitras has the skill set to fit into a top 6 role, even if it's premature and even if there's struggles in the 200-foot aspect of it. But like say Charlie Coyle or Pavel Zacha went down, and the Bruins found out that they were out for a significant amount of time, and say it's after the trade deadline, right? Like you're going to want an internal option in a center ice position that kind of has that natural high-end ability, even though it's still a working project. I think for that reason alone, I think Poitras shouldn't go back to Guelph, and there's other benefits to keeping him around as well. But simply as an insurance safety blanket, I would keep him.
Okay, I think I'm good now. So let's see if I can get through this. First off, I can tell that Sharon is probably also a listener of the Morning Brew with Jaffe and Razor, because I heard them talking about this on their most recent episode, and it is an interesting topic. I'm with Brian though. I'm not sending Poitras back, and mainly because I still think he can be the player we saw early on this season. There's no question that like the entire middle of his season has kind of gone sideways between World Juniors and that not going the way he would have wanted, injuries since coming back. He only has one goal since November 5th. He's played 22 games since then. He's been under 9 minutes of ice time in 3 of his last 4. So I understand like everyone kind of being a little down on him now and wondering where exactly he fits. Here's my counter. He is still 5th on the Bruins in 5-on-5 points per 60 minutes this season. He's behind only Charlie Coyle, David Pastrnak, Trent Frederick, and James Van Riemsdyk. He is ahead of names like Pavel Zacha, Brad Marchand, Morgan Geekie, Jake DeBrusk. So if you're sending him back, to me, that's got to be because you think he's hit some sort of wall that is going to prevent him from getting back to that player the rest of the season. And I'm not there yet. Like, I'm not convinced that he's hit that wall and there's no way around it. I think he's hit a wall, and I want to see if he can get over it and get back to being that player. He's had some time off here that might, depending on if there's a new injury or something, that might actually prove beneficial for him to have a little bit of a midseason reset. But I feel like that player who was producing pretty well at 5-on-5 is still there, and I'm not sending it back to Guelph just yet.
No, I think we need to send him to Turks and Caicos. Like Scott said, you two can go together and just reset with the break, get some sun. Now I'm making myself want to go there. But no, I don't think that player is gone. I think he's had such a disjointed middle part of the season, and like mixed messages I don't think have helped him, where it's like, no, we want you here, but we also are going to send you to play for Canada. And like, I think they need to get their messaging straight. I think they need to make him feel more comfortable, because nobody plays their best when they're always questioning in the back of their mind, like, am I going to keep losing playing time? Am I going to get sent back down to Guelph? Like, I want to be part of this team. They're giving me like some messages that maybe they don't want me to be here. I just wish that things would be more consistent for him. And obviously an injury, if he's dealing with something right now, is going to push that back even more. But he needs some consistency. He's young. He hasn't been playing in the same role the whole season. Like, if they decide to put him on the wing, like, that's going to mix it up even more. I just wish he had like a stretch of time where he could really be allowed to get to have some chemistry and get to feel more comfortable being up and with his standing. So I don't think he's like by any means bad enough to not be on this NHL roster. So that's why I say you don't send him back to Guelph, because he brings something that you need. And like Scott said, 5-on-5, he's been good, and he has these moments, and you just want to see him have more of an opportunity to work through and try to get back to that.
I agree, and I still just like looking back and hand to the sky, I still don't think this is that big of a deal. But I don't like that they sent him to World Juniors, because so much of what he has to learn this year is off the ice too. It's like learning the life of a professional athlete, and little things like getting into a routine. Like, he's been uprooted. He was living in a hotel for the first month and a half of the season. Then he moves in with Beecher somewhere. It's like getting acclimated to driving.
And now Beecher's not even there.
Poor Maddie. But like getting used to like driving to Warrior every day for practice, getting used to driving a Hanscom to catch your flight for road trips, learning how to be a professional on the road, learning how to be a professional at home. And then they just, he's in the middle of doing all that. All the off-ice stuff he's still trying to learn too.
Trying to learn how to cook. And the Bruins thought it was a great idea to not only send him to World Juniors, but to send him 7 hours ahead, mess with his sleeping schedule, all for a World Juniors tournament with new teammates and no chemistry. And then he has to come back jet lagged. It just made no sense to me, honestly. I just didn't think the positives outweighed the potential negatives. But it's not a huge deal.
I still have absolutely no problem with it, because I think.
Well, we already went over this, Scott. It's 2v1, and you lose this time. Okay. All right.
I think learning to be a leader on a team, playing in high pressure situations on a huge international stage.
It's not.
I think it's important.
It's not that huge.
We
almost made it to the end of the episode without arguing with each other.
Not that big of a deal.
My one last note on Poitras. One thing he does have to do: shoot more. His last 11 games, he has 5 total shots on goal. He's had 0 in 4 of his last 6. So that has to change, and that's one thing that has been a concern with him. Right? Is sometimes he doesn't shoot enough. So he's in one of those stretches right now.
Yeah,
right.
No, definitely.
We got
one final question. You want to do the honors, Bridgette?
Sure. We did kind of touch on this a little bit earlier, because it more goes back to like the trading for a defenseman. So this is from Trent. He left this comment on our YouTube. said, I know number 48, Matt Grzelcyk, is a Boston boy, but I would say at the deadline, I would package him with someone like Lysell and get a top 6 forward, or even bring in a top 4 puck moving defenseman. Playoffs are a whole new animal, as we know, and to add a nice goal scorer to put with, I'm guessing this is supposed to say pasta, or a top 4 D would be big. I think we answered the Grzelcyk thing earlier, just that he's got no term left, so that makes him hard to trade.
I mean, and again, this question it's a little bit easier to answer if there's names attached, right? Like, you're giving me tangible names for the Bruins, right? Grzelcyk and Lysell, and then but to offer back, a top 6 forward or a top 4 D-man, the hypothetical is tough if I don't know the name attached. I would be open to it if the name is big enough, right, or impactful enough. So maybe we can think of a couple of names off the top of our heads.
Oh, wait a minute. We didn't even get to the one that I was pissed about that I said in the beginning. The stupid trade proposal. All right. So Elias Lindholm is a top 6 forward that we had talked about in the past. If maybe this makes a difference in this part of the conversation. But if no one has seen this on Twitter, should we retweet it on the Skate Pod? Because I saw this yesterday and I sent it to the guys because I was like, this is so dumb. Like, why is this even on my screen right now as an option? So Bruins, for one reason or another, have been kind of attached to the Elias Lindholm trade rumors. And the Athletic suggested that Bruins received just Elias Lindholm, and Calgary gets the Bruins 2025 first round pick, Matt Poitras, and Trent Frederick. And I have an issue with this entire thing. The fact that you even tacked Trent Frederick onto the end of this just makes me laugh. Like, what? No. I mean, Trent Frederick is playing like a fucking top 6 forward right now. What the hell would be that would be such a steal. That would be Don Sweeney is not that stupid.
Literally, Lindholm himself this year is not worth a first round draft pick going the other way. I mean, based off his performance so far this year, he's not worth a first round draft pick. And that's now prior to this year, maybe, but not right now.
Plus a potential future top center in the league in Matt Poitras, and Trent Frederick, who's having his best year and trending in the right direction and still young and in his prime. What are we talking about?
Almost the same points as Lindholm.
Right. I was just going to say that Trent Frederick this season has 5 more goals than Elias Lindholm and 3 fewer points.
No power play time.
It doesn't make any sense.
Frederick's doing that with less playing time.
I don't even like that 1-for-1. I don't even like a 1-for-1 Frederick.
I was gonna say I wouldn't make this trade with any 2 of these pieces. Even if you take any one of these out, I'm still not doing it. And this, so I actually have so this was a thing the Athletic did on different packages teams could put together for Elias Lindholm, and it was Corey Pronman, who's one of their expert prospect analysts. So I think that was more his role. And Julian McKenzie, who covers the Calgary Flames for the Athletic. Both very good writers that I respect a lot, but clearly they just think way more highly of Elias Lindholm than I do. And I'm sure the Flames would love to ask for this kind of return from teams. But even going through other teams' packages that they put together, they're all too much. And I think that's having 2 people who just value Lindholm more than I think a lot of people are going to, especially because he is having a little bit of a down year. So in the past, when the Athletic has done things like this, what they've done is they've had the beat writer for one team make a proposal to the beat writer of another team. So it would have been Fluto putting this package together from the Bruins perspective, and then Julian McKenzie would respond from the Flames perspective. And I like that setup better because it gets more opinions involved. This, to me, this whole article starts from a premise of, like I said, 2 people who just think way more highly of Lindholm than I think a lot of people are going to, certainly than I do.
Yeah, I think Fluto would have been like, no, we got to go back to the drawing board on this trade proposal because this isn't going to be well received. There's not going to be, yeah, a lot of times these things are just to kind of spark conversation, and the conversation usually is like a back and forth. Like you and I, like we've had these on here before where we disagreed. Like one of us thought it was a good idea, one of us. When it's universally like, no, this is a bad idea, like you got to do a little bit better. It should be something we could debate rather than just sit here and be like, this is just not even close to something that would ever happen.
I mean, and look, for argument's sake, in theory, it's not a terrible piece of rhetoric, right? Like you put it out there, Bruins fans watching Frederic, watching him get better and better every game, are like, why would we do that? They're pretty much tied in points 1-for-1, and you want us to add, but well, it's the classic, like you have a rising player. I don't know if you can see a rising player, and then a player that's kind of like on the descend, and it's like, okay, do you hitch your wagon? Do you put all your chips in the Trent Frederic camp of like, no, I think he's gonna get better and better, or like maybe this is his plateau, or do you put your chips in like the Lindholm would go back to where he should be in a better situation? It's kind of a gamble, right? If it was 1-for-1, it'd be more of like a enticing, like, okay, do you bet on the player who's rising, or you know what I mean? That's more interesting. But to add in these other pieces too, it's like, no.
Yeah, well, to tie this into the question from Trent, would you trade someone like Fabian Lysell with a D prospect or like a draft pick or something for Elias Lindholm? Is that more of like what you're comfortable with trading for? Like what would be the comfortable place for the Bruins to be on a trade like that?
That's probably, closer to reality, but the problem, and one that's highlighted by like Frederic getting included here, is unless, I mentioned the scenario with Forbert potentially ending up on LTIR again, but like unless that happens, the Bruins do have to move out money in order to bring anyone in. They have $800,000 in cap space right now. So you can't trade for Elias Lindholm for just a prospect and a pick. Salary has to move somewhere. And I know every Bruins fan's like, oh, well, just get rid of Grizzly or Forbert. And it's like, okay, but someone has to want those guys, and they're on expiring contracts. So again, like, why would a team that's turning the page to next year, like the Calgary Flames, want either one of them, unless they are planning to re-sign them? So that's where someone like Frederic with term comes in, and that's where this all really gets uncomfortable, because it's like, what salary are the Bruins moving out that actually has value to another team? Or, the second option is you execute a salary dump somewhere, and we know what those look like because we saw with Taylor Hall. It means you don't get equal value for the players. So it's going to be a challenge for Don Sweeney to make trades before the March 9th deadline.
And Trent Frederic isn't just a homegrown Bruins prospect who's now starting to like realize their offensive capabilities. He's a power forward that is the type of player that you would want in April and beyond as he gets older. Like that's the exact type of player you want in a playoff series. So it's to me, it's interesting because you rewind the clocks a couple of years, and Trent Frederic's value was pretty low, and right now it's
Didn't they scratch him last playoffs one game?
Briefly they did, yeah. But right now he's just where he is and where it appears he's going. He's a player that you want to see in a Bruins jersey for a long time to come, and it's getting like if you were to part with him, it's like, okay, it better be something really worthwhile, because it's not where he is right now, it's where he is. It's where I think we all see him going potentially as like a true power forward that can score 30 goals in this league. So, all right, I think that probably wraps up the mailbag. I did have a quick Bridgette the fashion segment if you want to get the banner going, but
okay.
I was in a Dick's Sporting Goods recently, and I came across a 1990 Stanley Cup Finals Bruins jersey, Ray Bourque jersey, a white jersey with the 1990 Stanley Cup patch. Oh my goodness! To see that in person, I was like, holy smokes, I want to take you to prom. And right next to it was one of the like the Centennial jerseys. And I was like, oh my God, these Bruins jerseys are these old school Bruins jerseys are so much better. It's not even funny. And what's crazy is that night, I'm honestly embarrassed to admit this. One of my dreams last night was that the Bruins won the Stanley Cup, and they won the Stanley Cup in their black Centennial jerseys that they're wearing this year. And I shit you not, in my dream, I was like, of course they won the cup this year. Like they're gonna with these jerseys, they won the cup. Like you only won the cup. They won the cup 6 times in their entire franchise, and now they won it finally again. And they're wearing these shitty jerseys.
Oh God.
Does that make me a bad Bruins fan? Like that's like the one.
I think it just means your priorities are a little bit different than most other people's.
Yeah,
if I could
I think it means
reason.
I just think the fact that you're dreaming / having nightmares about this in the first place.
It's like the Bruins won the Stanley Cup. And
just
it was
that you
a total
have
nightmare.
Yeah, I think you just have bigger issues than we're going to be able to work through in the last 5 minutes of this podcast.
Wait, can I say something funny? Because that exact same jersey that Brian is, the exact same white Ray Bourque jersey that you are describing.
Yeah.
Thursday night, I saw someone wearing it, and a mullet wig from the 90s or whatever, singing karaoke at the restaurant I was at. So this guy's just dressed like old school Ray Bourque with like literally like the old school like perm mullet and singing. And I was like, wow, Ray Bourque's here. This is.
I mean, listen. I don't deny I have issues, guys. Okay, and we could go a couple hours on those, but I think if the Boston Bruins won the Stanley Cup this year, it would be absolutely incredible. I don't think I'd be alone. I feel like Bruins fans deep down, you might be like, I wish they didn't have these jerseys winning the cup. I don't think I'm alone, because it's a color gold that they have not worn in their entire 100 years until this year. And there's still a part of me that feels like I'm watching a club hockey team, not the Bruins. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but I think if all of you took some truth serum deep down, I think you'd all be saying, I'm kind of with them on this one.
Yeah, you're not wrong, but for people watching on YouTube, Bridget's showing us the video of Ray Bourque singing.
But to be fair, that's not the same jersey I was talking about. But
yeah, right.
But I'm a cuckoo when it comes to jerseys.
Anyway, it reminded me of this wonderful rendition of, I don't even remember what he was singing, and I'm not going to turn the volume on.
I mean,
I think that's an issue that fans will complain about 2 years down the road, though. I think they'll forget about it during the parade.
Oh, absolutely.
Shenanigans as the cup makes its way around, and we all get to track every party that the Bruins are at and all that stuff.
And totally getting invited, Scott. So
absolutely, I don't disagree. Okay, that was all I wanted to say. I actually dreamt about how much I wish they weren't wearing that gold. It's creeping into my unconscious now.
Yes,
it's not good. It's not good. Anyway, that probably wraps up for me. You guys good?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm good.
So are we gonna record for All-Star Weekend, or kind of punt until next week, do you think?
I think I think we probably regroup after the All-Star game. Okay. Something early next week.
All right. That works for me. Thank you all for sending in your questions. Enjoy the All-Star festivities, and we will talk to you next week. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment.